Hello and a warm Collisions YYC. Welcome to the guest this morning, Mr. Sid Tetz. How you doing, Sid?
Good. Yourself, Tyler?
I'm really good, man. Thanks for coming on. Always enjoy these chats. As my audience knows, I get to go deep and learn about things that from the construction materials, the construction industry, what's happening, Eastern and Western Canada. We had a little pre-chat the other day, so I'm quite excited. So let's let everybody into the tent. You are Vice President of Sales and Marketing at CGC Inc. So I'll let you give us a little bit of the elevator pitch on what you guys do, what you're all about, and we'll unpack it from there.
For sure. So CGC, Canadian Gypsum Company, we supply the light commercial construction industry. We're predominantly known for our product sheetrock. So if you've watched HGTV, you've probably heard them refer to drywall as sheetrock. That's because we're the innovator of drywall. So we're the first ones to really make it and sell it across the world. What does drywall do? Drywall provides, obviously a finishing surface to make spaces look beautiful, but it also provides the fire protection in the building assemblies. And, that's really what helped us kickstart and get our foothold in the market in terms of pretty much every building, whether you live, work, or play there, is surrounded by drywall. And then outside of drywall, we also have suspended ceilings that we manufacture as well. And then kind of in that same space, we have some industrial products. So pretty well diversified company, but we're focused in the light commercial space. If your listeners were walking through a Home Depot, they would definitely see our products we're exclusive with Home Depot in the big box retail segment across the country. So they would see our products if they walk down the drywall or ceiling tile aisle.
So from a distribution perspective, literally I go and pick up a sheet of drywall today. I'm a customer right up to somebody who's doing a 30-story tower and they need to get an order to put drywall in. You guys are kind of fully integrated up and down the chain.
100%. So we sell a distributed network of distributors. So we have kind of three distinct segments that we service. So, the retail big box is probably the one that people are most familiar with, Home Depot. But then you'd have others like lumber yards, which would be like home hardware. So many rural communities, your home hardware is one of the cornerstones.
Yeah, kind of your one-stop shop for all your construction needs kind of mindset. Small contractors up to all the way to individual, somebody putting up a shed.
100%. And then you've got another segment where we call them gypsum specialty dealers. They have specialized equipment to get it up to that, 32nd floor. Or they have, the people and proper equipment to make sure that they can move drywall around. It's not the easiest thing to move. It's heavy.
And it breaks. It breaks if you're not careful.
That's right. So you got to be careful, right? So it's not for the faint of heart. It's a challenging thing to get in the right place at the right time. But we have distributors serving those kind of three distinct segments of the market, and they're able to make sure that we can get our products on the job sites on time and close to budget, I would say, or as close to budget as possible.
Which is always getting on time, on budget. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So sheetrock, drywall, same.
Same. Sheetrock it's become kind of, synonymous within the building materials industry because we were the innovator of drywall, the first ones to really make it. Everyone refers to all drywall typically as sheetrock, but sheetrock is our brand. That's what we created, and we're pretty proud of that. That's obviously a unique feature of the company. We have some other really unique innovations. We're also the innovators of the steel stud. So a lot of basements are done in steel studs, and obviously commercial buildings as well. So little known things. I mean, we're pretty humble, so we don't necessarily sing that from the mountaintops, but there's a lot of unique things in terms of commercial and residential construction that CGC has been involved in.
What's the history then? How long has CGC been around as an organization?
So CGC has been around for just over 100 years. Our parent company, USC, is that we're 117 years old now. We've been around.
That's impressive. Those are impressive numbers, man. Those have some weight. They have some weight behind them.
We've been around for a little while, yeah. And probably the more challenging part is when you're around for that long, how do you continue to innovate and make your platform?
Sid, you might have cut off my next question. So talk to me about, that's a really good question. And I've had a lot of people on. Why I was so curious when your team reached out to me was I've often heard the construction industry, that's a broad term, being slow to innovate, slow to, buzzword digital transformation. What's concrete's concrete, wood studs and steel studs, and an innovation from wood to steel studs. But that was how many years ago? Talk to me even about how innovation is looked at your organization. And then maybe we'll just get to touch into what you're seeing in the construction industry as a whole.
For sure. So I think there's a few things that make innovation challenging within the building materials space. I mean, we talk about the rate of adoption, and I think, it's probably the first place I want to start with digging in is because it's got to start at the contractor level or on the job site, right? So So why would a contractor be resistant or a little hesitant to change things? I really look at, building codes, challenges they've had before with trying something new. Probably the metaphor that I could lean on is now Instagram and people trying to do their own renovations, and they get halfway through it and they go, I tried this new thing and oh my gosh, it turned out totally backwards to what I wanted. So I think, when you're a contractor and you're working with a builder or a developer, the reason why they're picking you over someone else is because they're really putting a lot of trust and faith in your ability to deliver what you say you're going to deliver on time and on budget, which sounds great on paper, but it's a lot harder to do in a practical sense. And
anyone who's done any type of construction, you're probably going to be over budget of what you thought, and it probably is going to take a little bit longer. It almost becomes a foregone conclusion just by the sheer volume of variables. So a new innovation introduces more variables.
100%. And you have to get over that hurdle of, is it accepted in the building code? So that's the first step. So, okay, so you can adhere to the codes and standards and the testing requirements, which is all very expensive to try and get through. And it's difficult to do because you're not really sure if that product is going to work out or if it will be adopted. Then you got to get actually into the market and explain to the market, hey, here's why this innovation might be something of interest to you, and it does meet building codes, et cetera. But now you got to have a contractor who's willing to take on that risk and say, okay, you know what, CGC, I trust you. I've seen you guys innovate before, and I believe that you're capable of doing what you say you're going to do. I'm putting my reputation on the line, and it's all in Canada. It's flowing through a distribution network too. So you got to convince the distributor.
Guys you're even a layer removed, right?
Exactly. So there's a bunch of people in that channel who are all going, hey, like, do we really want to try and bring this on? And we got to get these buildings out. Buildings never seem to be, to your point earlier around budgets, like the budgets aren't declining. The buildings are getting more complicated. Yeah. They're getting harder to build. And that's, part of that is, hey, I think at the end of the day, there's better product being put out there because building codes have increased. So I certainly don't want it to sound like building codes are a detractor, because the building codes do help push some innovation for sure. So that is a positive thing, but it's hard when you think about affordability, how do you balance those two things, right? So because innovation comes with investment and, comes with 100%. An unknown outcome too when you're spending on innovation. So in our organization, how we look at that is how can we, in Canada at least, we've been somewhat range bound. The market isn't exactly like, if you look at housing starts, the market's not exactly growing. It stayed kind of within the same range of, at the low end, 185, 190,000 housing starts, to the top end being just recently hit, which was around 270. Okay. Which in Canada, those numbers hadn't been seen since like the 70s. Now, that being said, it's difficult because we start to run into other capacity constraints and things like that. But from our perspective, how do we play a role in those capacity constraints? So what I'm referring to there is labor capacity and then the productivity of the distributor network that we rely on. So our innovations are really focused on how do we make it easier to do business with CGC? So how can we make that, reduce friction? Not that I want to use Uber's term, but I think that's the appropriate one. I think they were the first ones to talk about that frictionless transaction.
How do you make my life easier, right? At the end of the day.
Exactly. So how do we make that transaction from dealer to us as seamless as possible, so that they kind of know what to expect, where we have product, what we have available, how we get it to them, that we get it to them when they expect it, et cetera. That we've got kind of a view into their business, which is difficult because oftentimes, the reason we use distributors is the contractors have a lot of different jobs going on. Mm-hmm. And those jobs could be delayed because of plumbing or because of HVAC or because of electrical, or because we're usually closer to the tail end of the project with some of our materials. And that makes it very difficult. The scheduling is not very straightforward. Reducing friction in that space, that's certainly part of it. But then the other thing that we think about when it comes to innovation is, how do we actually make the products easier to install the first time? How do we make them so that they're not damaged in the several different areas where they're touched? How do we prepare for, at some point, there's probably automation coming to our industry where some of the labor might be offset by robots and things like that. Mm-hmm. So how do we make sure that the product can be installed? Because you think about the autonomous journey, like even roads and et cetera, like roads are safer when all cars are autonomous, when there's some cars that are autonomous and some cars that aren't. So we'll have that same challenge when it comes to installing products in the construction industry. So how do we innovate the product so that it's as easy to install as possible with less margin for error. That's really where we're focused. And on our side, that comes down to a few things. So that's the durability and the weight of the product, which we've always been on the front end. We've been leading that change. When it comes to drywall, think you're lifting a sheet that at the very lightest might be somewhere in the 35 pound range, which 35 pounds doesn't sound like that much, but lift 100 of them in a day
and spread it over a 4.8 piece of thing with no handles or you're not walking up grabbing it. Like, it's not a dumbbell, right? It's not a 35 pound dumbbell.
Exactly. And
there's some variables involved, and then you're putting it up over your head in a work environment. I've hung enough drywall to appreciate that, and enough to know that wasn't my calling.
Yeah. It's very difficult, and then that's, I'm talking like a 4x8 feet, like spread it out to 10 to 12 feet.
Yeah.
It's quite challenging. So, I mean, it's not always appreciated until you spend a bunch of time on a job site, but that's really the area. Like, when we think about innovation, it's how can we make it easier to install so that we're prepared for that technological change that we assume will happen, especially as our industry is on the older end, like in terms of age demographics. A lot of the contractors are potentially going to age out of the industry at some point, and there isn't a whole lot of younger folks coming in. So how do we make sure that we can use the capacity that's still available, make that transition, and then when the new folks come in and they're probably using different tools than what we have in the past,
right,
how to make sure that our products can be easily managed through that cycle, which that change management, it's going to happen at some point. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting a lot closer.
Well, you certainly hear about it, and it's not something that isn't happening in other industries, but you've got such a physical, like, this isn't just intellectual capital going out the door. You have physical know-how, and it's like eventually there's somebody with their hands on the tools, right? to do the thing. And for you guys, it's just interesting to think as an organization of, like, from a core competency perspective. I bet there's no question your core competency on how to make the best sheetrock. You've been doing it for 100 plus years. You can make sheetrock like it's nobody's business. But if you really start to think about the problem you're solving for your customer, it forces you to go, okay, our sheetrock's great. We got to go farther, right? We got to go deeper. And sometimes, different organizations, that becomes the superpower, or it gets missed. And then someone comes in, and not an incumbent, but the incumbent gets knocked out because someone comes in and then solves the next problem.
Right.
And I'm assuming for you guys, that's a big, you've got to get out there and really empathize with the person who's handling your product and putting it up on the wall physically.
100%. And on that front, we think about, so I was talking about being kind of range bound from a starts perspective. Selfishly, if we can increase the productivity and efficiency with which our products are installed, we have the potential to, help expand that range. Now, we're one product of about 17, depending on the wall system, that go into a wall system.
Is it 17 different factors? Okay, that's interesting.
You can call it that if you're including plumbing, electrical, air barriers, et cetera, right?
Well, so all the things that can disrupt the journey, which you mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah, fenestration, like all of it, right? So on our side too, when we think about innovation, it's how do you think about that wall system differently, and how do you think about how do we provide more value to that system potentially? And where can we take steps out, or how can we help that process happen more efficiently? Again, if it was easy, it probably would have already been done. But one thing that we're well known for is we have our Center of Innovation that's focused on. We've got a number of PhDs who this is their life. They spend their time trying to unravel these really unique problems, and it's really cool. It's really interesting. But again, it's something that when you're in Home Depot looking at a sheet of drywall or a sheet of sheetrock, you're not thinking all of that goes into drywall.
No, right? you're typically not. Thoughts on some of I'm just thinking of Falk Built, I'm thinking of SMED, I'm thinking of some of those when I think about those, innovated wall systems, modular, where lots of companies have got traction and have tried to like almost flip it on its head, right? And do it differently. I'm assuming that's on your guys' radar, but it seems like it's the smaller niche part of your industry versus the high volume, which is the sheetrock space.
100%. Yeah, and one of the challenges is commercializing some of those systems to the point that they can, have that productivity and efficiency gain. Sometimes, some of the products you just mentioned, they add a lot of value in terms of the wall system itself. Okay. But the speed at which they can be installed, or the sustainability impact of how they are installed, is more challenging. And
cost, like let's just talk about dollars and cents too, right?
100%. And then at the end of the day, what's unique about drywall is we're so used to spaces being finished with drywall, and that's how it should look. Because the thing that typically comes up is 3D printed homes, and there is a unique value proposition there where you can install the equipment and it's printing the home, leveraging the sediment that's around the job site. That's really cool if it's possible.
Which, to say that out loud, it's like, well, that makes tons of sense. Like, you know what I mean? That's one of those, it sounds great when you say it, but then let's talk about the reality. And I've talked to a few people on the show about trying to bring manufacturing out in the manufacturing process out into the field. And it sounds great, but it doesn't always work out that way.
It's pretty tricky. Pretty tricky, especially like if you start to think of like densified urban areas, that's probably not a solution. Where we are in Alberta, that's kind of unique because we're not, constrained other than a few parts of the province by mountains, but we're not geographically constrained where we have to build within a footprint.
Rivers, mountains, oceans kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. So hey, there's a unique value proposition there. It's getting it to the efficiency and the productivity standards that are required to meet that cost expectation. And then at the end of the day, that poured wall look, maybe it works for like Nevada or Arizona or something. Like it kind of looks neat when you're in the desert, but that's not what most markets are comfortable with. So you'd still be finishing it probably with a drywall type of a material, right? Or parging, going back to the way that we used to do things before, drywall really changed the market, or sheetrock. And
it's interesting when you think of a lot of those as a consumer, I'm like, oh, you're doing a 3D printing, it's going to be cheaper. Like there's always this weird, I think, association is like, oh, it's a new technology. Oh, it's clearly not just to be better or better R value. Oh, it's going to be cheaper, right? And that's not often the case. Or certainly not there yet.
Yeah. Well, what I think about like, hey, where 3D printing in the construction materials space can add a lot of value is on the things that are fabricated. So any kind of unique design element.
Okay.
There certainly is potential in that space. So for our business, that would be our ceilings.
Yep.
So the suspended ceilings that we offer, when you're walking through like a metro station and there's a really unique or airport and there's something, kind of cool, those are probably
that's also functional from an acoustical perspective. Like it kind of, it brings you more joy of being in the space, just to be candid about it. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And that's probably something that I really haven't touched on in terms of our products. Like when you talk about the innovating side of it is, how do you bring comfort into the equation, right? So we talk about safety, we talk about, the aesthetics, but now we're talking about comfort. And sometimes we don't think about the acoustics, and, drywall and ceiling tiles or ceiling systems provide that. And so that's, another space that when we think about innovation internally, it's, okay, so how are we creating or adding more value so that, that position, like you said, like there's always the disruptors who are going to try, especially when you're 117 years old,
Yeah, when someone has it, you are the person with the target on your back, right? Ultimately, just because you're the known commodity in the space.
100%.
Yeah,
and it's you gotta participate in the market and think like a hungry number two. Not that you're number one.
How do you keep that? When you're no longer a startup? Is it a phase? Is it a financial, or is it a mindset? It's often a mindset, right?
100%. Yeah. So it's and that's why doing things like this is really great, because you get the opportunity to meet different people and get a bunch of different ideas going. And I think, we celebrate that as well. So that would be part of our innovation culture. And we're trying to do more of it, or as much of it as we can, because I don't know that.
Sometimes it's just getting out there and bumping into ideas, right?
100%. Yeah. Business is not a linear thing. We all have business plans, but we usually don't follow them after the first year.
Yeah, we all have fictitious ideas about the future that often get adjusted by things outside of our control. When you say the word comfort, are we seeing more? It's almost back to the friction comment. Being uncomfortable in a space is friction. Being in a restaurant where I can't talk to the person across from me because it's all hard surfaces, or being in an office that's just grating on me all the time, and I don't know why I'm always in a bad mood. Are owners, tenants, companies, employers becoming more aware of that? Like, are we seeing more of a demand of like, we have to make sure our people are comfortable, or they will literally leave and go home? They'll go work from their computer somewhere else.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, you're seeing that across the market. I mean, that is the number one complaint in high-rise residential is acoustics. And how do you stop that, penetration between floor and wall systems so that it doesn't spread to other units? Units in general are, current market, they're getting smaller. So they're smaller, tighter boxes closer together, that we're trying to build as cost effective as possible. So you're trying to take as many things out, but still have, all of what you need to make the space comfortable. That's a very difficult challenge.
That's just saying that out loud. I'm like, wow, I wonder why we're struggling to do that.
Well, and it's little things too. Like people don't realize it's, hey, I want so many electrical outlets in my space. Like all of those are penetrations that make it harder to control the acoustics of that space. Right. And it seems like such a small thing.
But I got to charge all my stuff.
100%. Yeah, everything's electric. Yeah.
And only going to be more. Their dependence on. I didn't really think finding power would be one of the biggest concerns in my travels if I go back 20 years ago.
Right. So that's where when we talk about lightweight and trying to make it easier to install, and then you're also trying to manage this acoustic side of the equation. It's how does that impact the built assembly, because oftentimes drywall provides a lot of density, as an example, to the wall system. So you're spreading out the acoustics. So think of sound like a wave, it's going to hit the wall, and you need to disperse that. That's where the density factor is important. It spreads that acoustics out. So it spreads the sound waves across a large panel. And then you want to break the path. So that's where there's something called a resilient channel that you attach the wallboard to. Okay. So then you're stopping the direct path to the studs. Now there's some of that energy still moving through the wall assembly. It's getting to the space where we usually fill it with insulation. But again, if you're trying to take cost out, you might take the insulation out of the studs. Yeah. But you're trying to spread as much of that energy out as possible in the studs as well before it gets to the other side. And then it's like, oh, by the way, you've got flanking paths because you connect your wall to your floor. So now the sound can move, not just across units, but down through units.
So interesting. Oh, you can geek out on sound. It's a very interesting rabbit hole, that hole. Just listening to you talk. It's so 100%. Interesting.
And that's why, like, when people are like, well, just make it lighter so it's easier for the folks to install and you can put more on a truck.
Then you compromise over here.
100%. And in some markets, we talk about building code, that is part of the code, and this is more of a European thing. Okay. But, it's to the detriment of some innovation on that front, because, again, if we can get more on a truck, if we can get more in a certain area of a building because we're not overloading the floor, that means the installers can install it more efficiently, or the trucks can lift it higher because they're not lifting as much weight. Mm-hmm. All those things are important, but we don't want to compromise the actual performance of the built system. So, when you think about, like, when we're talking about that disruptor coming up, they don't have an easy challenge either, because we've been working at this for a long time. We've got a lot of people working on it. That's not a simple solution to solve for, right? So but it's a lot of fun, right? And if we can find unique, chemical compositions.
There's no boring days, Sid.
No, not at all. Not at all.
If you stop, so if I joke in our industry, it's like you can have it good, you can have it faster, you can have it cheap, you can all three. But I'm listening to you talk. It's more like an octagon. It needs to be light. It needs to be cost effective. It needs to sound. It needs to be comfortable. It needs to be able to be scalable. Like, I'm kind of just building it. If I had a whiteboard, I'd be like, I'm almost filled up 8 sides just thinking and listening to you talk about it. And every time you add to one, it can take away from the other.
100%. Yeah. So you're trying to balance all those factors. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if it is an octagon. There's a lot of slides. I've heard at least 6 solids. You made a comment about Europe. What markets do you look to? Has anybody got this figured out? Like, we've been building forever. I joke sometimes. My wife, I live in Marda Loop in South Calgary, and I walk by and I'm like, I just see an ugly house. I'm like, how does that happen? We've been doing this forever. How did we mess that up so badly? But it is. There's preferences. There's architecture. Like, there's so many ways people think about it. When you look out globally, is there any jurisdictions that you look at where they have to? Like, I think of some Asian markets where it's so much mass volume in these little shoeboxes, which we're going to. Do you guys learn and take away, or is everybody still struggling with it just at different phases?
There's certainly different phases, but I think the other thing is building systems are different in different markets. So Europe is more, built and established, and I would say where they have a bit of an advantage is when they talk about building as a system, they're often talking about retrofitting buildings to be more energy efficient or to,
and these buildings might be 800 years old.
100%. Yeah. Which we're not going to have that unique circumstance in North America. Right.
I was in Madrid for a while where we were saying there was a house being renoed, or a house, a building, but it was maybe 20 feet wide and looked like 50 feet tall, and the amount of gear and miniature trucks and little bobcats and things that they were, I was just like, what a different world to think about what this crew is tackling. And I was there for a week. Not much seemed to transpire in a week. It was definitely on Spanish time, but I just was really admiring what environment the constraints they had to work in were like, almost looked unsurmountable, but they don't know any difference, just their world.
100%. Yeah. And that's totally different than what you would see in Calgary or Edmonton or in most places across Canada, in fairness, right? So
Yeah.
even though we do have some densely populated areas, it's
It's
nothing
not like that. Yeah. It's
not like that. No, not at all. So see, they're kind of I would say Europe has an advantage there on that front. Where Canada, we don't really get, I think, again, we're just a very humble country, so maybe we don't talk about it enough. But on the energy efficiency standpoint, testing, passive homes, things like that, like especially stick-built, like wood-built homes, our building codes are quite strong from that perspective, as well as the U.S. U.S. really picked it up over the last decade.
Interesting. Okay.
They were further behind, and they've certainly adopted that model. I mean, as soon as we started looking at greenhouse gases and the amount of emissions that the housing industry or where we live, work, and play, like the buildings that we build, they emit a significant, I think it's like 17-18% of our greenhouse gases in Canada. That's a significant portion. So, we have been doing a good job, and I think people, like when I mentioned earlier, today I do think we get better homes than what I live in a 1970s build, and the thing that I want to do is try and improve some of the efficiency measures of it, right? So, and in Alberta, outside of Alberta, this is not common, but in the prairies for sure. My house had 2 furnaces in it. I've got friends down the street, they have 3 or 4, and another friend has 4 furnaces in their home. Like, it just seems insane. Like, you go to Ontario.
That seems nuts to me, actually. Yeah, it's 100%. Just the amount of energy, just the utility bill, and it just sounds so inefficient.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, hey, like we went from that to now, if you walk in most new builds, there's these little things that look like a beer fridge, and that's heating the home. And it's using, 65 to maybe 80,000 BTUs to heat that house. That's totally different than, the way we used to build. And a significant improvement. And that hasn't come without cost, right? So
there's that initial investment for that long term, like and thinking about things in a longer horizon. I was very fortunate. I moved into an ICF constructed home from a traditional stick home where every room was a different temperature in the winter to now every room is the exact same temperature all the time. And once you have the thermal I was the second owner, somebody paid that extra, but the benefit now, like that I received from this home, I wouldn't think of doing it any other way, but until you experience it, it's easy to price yourself out of the choice without really understanding the benefits of comfort. But it also costs, like, the home's bigger and it costs less to heat and to do everything with, because it's just a better envelope in itself. But that would be hard to have not experienced and wanted to outlay the cash.
100%. Well, and I think the other thing that is considered, or maybe we don't say it out loud, but usually the way that housing is thought of as an investment is that the house itself is a depreciating asset. So whatever's on the land is depreciating, and the land is what's appreciating in value.
That is a more honest perspective of what is the real estate boom, right? Or what it's a land boom. Actually, it's access to that piece of dirt in a key area that other people want to be in.
And that's the big challenge to try and, how do we, to your point, if you put something that's built better on top of that land, can they actually appreciate, more equally over time? That's the question, and love to see.
That's an interesting perspective. I've never heard it said that way. I really like that.
It would be cool if the industry could move in that direction. I don't know if it can, but that certainly would help that value prop or the overall impact of construction and housing for sure.
Yeah. How can they, what would it be like if they appreciated together? And how would you think about your investment differently if you were going into it with that mindset? It literally changes everything, right? When you shift that filter.
Yeah. Well, and I also think oftentimes, like, housing is an emotional purchase. So you walk through a bunch of different houses and you emotionally connect to it. So your case is maybe a little unique, where you were like, you bought into the value proposition of like, hey, this is an ICF built home. You'd obviously experience what living in a home with like hot and cold rooms, where there was probably one really long duct run. So that room was super cold. And then you had, the furnace was here, and just straight up that room was like super hot, right? So if you live in that environment, suddenly that value prop is a lot higher to you. But not everybody recognizes that until they And I think that's why
it took me three homes. This is my third house purchase to figure that out because I didn't have a reference point. I didn't know. I grew up in a 150-year-old farmhouse in Quebec. Every room was cold, except the room that had the wood fire in it. That was the only room that was warm.
Yeah, put a sweater on, hey?
And deal with it. Exactly. There wasn't a lot of empathy either, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But everybody lived in 100-year-old farmhouses, so it just was what it was. Like you opened up the wall and there's literally newspaper as insulation. That was maybe I'll take that as the extreme version on the outside.
No, for sure. And it's probably lath and plaster as well.
Yes, and the layers that you would find in an house built and another house was built beside it, and this was 125, this was 150. It was eclectic rural Quebec kind of housing.
Yeah.
Brick on the outside and basically some space, and then whatever you put on the inside, and then cold.
Yeah,
pretty much. The wind, when you could see the curtain blowing in the living room, you knew it was a windy day outside. It wasn't that bad. I don't want to sound like I grew up out in the street, but it was definitely very different than living in an ICF environment. That somebody took the time and had the belief, and my builder, who I've become friends with, and it's kind of why we bought the house. Our realtor got us connected with the builder, and he kind of came over, spent like 2 hours with us, and like, this is my vision. That was back in 07, 08. So he was a little ahead of his curve, had spent a lot of time in Germany, so brought what he thought were technologies that should be here. And I chat with him now about some of the homes he builds, and he's like, it's hard to compete when somebody's kind of selling lipstick over here and I'm selling quality inside the wall, but you can't see it. You can't see it with the ICF, but you see the overbuilt kitchen that's built on shoddy wood sticks is kind of his very passionate view of it. So I hear you talk. That's an interesting, that kind of flows out to the whole industry.
Because you're appealing to the emotional side of that purchase,
exactly
right?
What you said. Yeah, exactly.
You're getting people hooked on, oh wow, like this shower, this bathroom, this kitchen looks amazing, but the nuts and bolts of what makes it go is different, right? It's
Beauty's only skin deep, Sid. We're gonna get very philosophical here all of a sudden. Yeah. You've got to look deeper. You've got to open the book and read what's inside. Yeah, but until you have a little bit of experience, because the world out there is selling you on the shower and the kitchen and the finishings, right? That's what it is. Mm-hmm.
And we think about, and that's where we think the comfort comes from, because those are the places that we gather, right? We gather, we all have to eat, so we gather around the kitchen, and that's why it's such an important part of that purchase. So it's easy for us to think about that as something that makes us comfortable, right? But what we don't realize is that, and I think my team gets sick of me talking about this, but I've walked through a few different airports, and I will go to a different terminal if the acoustics are better, just when you're on the phone walking around.
Comfort.
Yeah, because it's that comfort piece. It is just that much easier, and that's all driven by the systems that they chose for that design. You mentioned soft surfaces, and we play a role in that in terms of the acoustics of the ceiling tile, right, or the wall assemblies.
Well, because it still comes back to, again, just reducing friction.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't even realize why you're uncomfortable. Like that's right. Often you're just like, this environment's annoying me. And if you become a little bit aware, it's usually there's sound, there's like, it's not there's no place, like it's not comfortable. So lack of comfort increases friction for me, and then I get annoyed. Then once I'm annoyed, everything causes friction.
Well, yeah, exactly. We're not the most fun people to be around.
No, definitely not. Yeah, no. Have you been talking to my wife? You made about the comment about building codes, and I've had a few conversations with builders from modular to it's like, hey, we have, let's just say we have figureheads that talk about the housing crisis and we need to get this many houses, but yet the willingness to change and adjust those codes to allow for some things that may or may not, and I realize that there's a journey, could be better. When you look across Canada, is it pretty evenly distributed that way? Because obviously you spend a lot of time in a plane. Are we seeing the same kind of challenges in Ontario as we are in Alberta when it comes to those building codes that are maybe holding back some of that? Like, we have a housing crisis. We have more people than we have places for them to live. So there is we need to do more, but it's so much more complicated than just somebody saying that in the media, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, building codes are certainly one part of it. When you talk about the different ways to build, so if you're talking modular or ICF or, traditional stick built, the differences that you see across the country is more driven around densification and the geographics of the area. Because in some cases, if it's a more dense area, the likelihood to do modular or panel built homes or structures increases because you're not shipping such long distances. Again, similar challenge to moving our products around, because a lot of those panelized or panel built homes or modular homes, like the drywall breaks in the modular ones, and it's very difficult to put drywall on panels and ship them. And then on top of that, like with the panels in the modular homes, it's difficult to ship. So the less distance you have to move these things, the better. Otherwise, you have to increase, you moved from away from traditional studs to engineered studs, and that just increases cost. So then you really have to be turning dollars a lot faster as a builder. And that's really the constraint. I wouldn't say it's so much the building codes. I would say it's more the financial elements associated with construction, right?
And I guess would be a balance, because then I'm reducing my need for labor, which you can't go anywhere. Everyone's talking about trades, especially if I could just get some drywallers, if I could just get some framers. You hear that many times with some of my builder friends. I guess it's also looking at, well, we're going to spend a little bit more on material because it will save us on labor, but that's good. You're dealing almost with pennies at that point, right? In terms of what works out.
Well, yeah, especially because you have that expensive component of freight in addition to it too, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
you do see some regional differences on that front. I mean, things that could help. There's a lot of development fees, taxes, utility fees. There's a lot of fees associated with building a home that we don't always talk about. Hey, if some of those,
everybody wants their pound of flesh.
100%, and I get it. It makes sense, but I think that's one of the challenges associated. Like the developers have that challenge. I would also say too, we talked about that the land is the appreciating asset, and it's the appreciating asset because institutional investors largely hold a lot of the land across Canada, and they're going to sell it at a profit. They're not going to sell it at a loss, because this is people's pensions, it's their, and their retirement funds, et cetera, that are all invested in these things. So, that's part of the challenge with, building affordability is that system has to stay in place because we all benefit from it for the most part if we're contributing to an RSP or anything like that.
It's a pay to play model,
100%. And so, because we'll get a lot of finger pointing. It's like that Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at each other. You get the builders saying, well, the land's not costing any less, so I can't sell the home for less, right? And I need to make money in order to keep investing in my business to build more homes, et cetera, right? And the contractors are saying, well, the labor component and materials side of things is not getting any cheaper. So everybody's, slowly escalating things. And really what we need to find is more efficiency and productivity. So how do we get the homes built faster? How do we build them with less, we keep coming back to this topic of friction, but how do we build them with less friction? In Alberta, one thing that's unique, different provinces are doing different things. There's lots of stuff with zoning in BC as well as Alberta, but I think Alberta's done a nice job with the red tape reduction. The other things, like it's probably a culmination of a bunch of little things. Even the digitization of like zoning processes and permitting, if we could just digitize that process and make it more efficient, which some provinces are, a little further down the path. It often
depends on even what jurisdiction or what county. I'm just doing a build out in a rural county in Alberta, out in Mountain View, and like I'll send something in on the morning and I'll get it back in the afternoon. It almost knocks me off my chair. And then I hear people that work in other jurisdictions from a little closer to Calgary, and like I've been waiting for 6 months. Like just the difference of how two jurisdictions process a permit, which then slowed it, and that's months. Like let alone we haven't even got to construction yet. You're just trying to get permission to do it. And how that's done can make a huge difference on the speed at which things move forward.
100%. Yeah, and I think like as a comparison, you were asking about Europe earlier. Our parent company, the Canal organization, they're building a plant in the UK and they're building a plant in Croatia, or they've built. And we compare the number of permits that
would be really interesting.
We're in those two areas versus where we're building in Wheatland County, Alberta. There was quite a few permits to go through. Now the government was very welcoming to the investment and work with us on that front. And let's also not take back from, hey, the reason why we have permits is to keep people safe, to make sure our environment is looked after. So can't talk out of both sides of our mouth.
I'm not legislating reckless and abandoned. That didn't. We can look back in history, and that didn't really work out either. So
So it
didn't work out for certain groups worse than others.
But that's when you talk about like, hey, in the media we hear this, like we want more affordable housing, et cetera. Like those are some of the things that we probably need to look at. And I would say let's focus on doing the little things right. And the little things would be like digitizing the permitting process and making it more efficient. If we know that we're going to approve these permits because everything is in compliance, can we be leveraging some technologies to input that data more efficiently? An example that I'll give in our business is when our customers send us an order, we have a system that digests that order, puts it into our system as fast as it can, versus like before, we would have someone who would have to look at the order, put it in
literally a stack on people's desk. Yeah, it was literally, 100%.
So, why can't we do that with some of the other processes involved in the building construction industry? That there's got to be a more efficient way to do it. And
it does sound like low hanging fruit, not to overuse a cheesy statement, but you're right. But we get so focused on trying to change the massive things, but we are the sum of our parts.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
But if we changed all this, I'm like, well, why don't we just do this more efficiently? And, I've been in some meetings with large organizations doing digital transformation. And I was always amazed. And it taught me a lesson of how excited they were just to make a little thing more efficient, that they weren't trying to boil the ocean. Because one, you don't get buy-in, you don't get wins, you don't get people moving forward, because then it's like, oh God, that another initiative that failed, versus like, oh, that made my life easier. And then it kind of just slipped into the background and just became a one less thing I had to fuss over, right? Or work with.
Yeah.
With you guys building a plant in Western Canada, is that so? Before, is that going to be from a shipping? Like, what's the impact going to have on the customer having something now that close to Calgary?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Wheatland, Alberta plant in Carsland, our goal with that plant was really to be closer to the customer. One of the challenges that we have is we've got a very distributed network across North America of manufacturing assets that support the different regions and provinces, et cetera. One area where we didn't have coverage was, supporting BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. We are building Wheatland to be able to be in closer proximity, reduce the service time. Today, we're railing product in from as far away as New Brunswick, which is not ideal. Again, referring to wallboard not being the easiest thing to ship and not the lightest thing to ship either.
Shipping and weight go together really in unfortunate ways. That makes it expensive, but that's also a considerable investment. I appreciate for a company to make, when you're investing in plant and property like that. That's not a short term turnaround. Like, that's a long term game you guys are playing.
No, yeah, it's $210 million. 200 construction jobs, or 200 jobs through construction, 100 permanent jobs following the completion of the plant. We've been selling in this market for, like I said, around 100 years. So we
give or take a couple months. Yeah.
Give or take. Yeah. So we've been participating in the market for a long time. I mean, there are tariffs on drywall, which has limited our ability to leverage, our full network. But what Wheatland will be able to do is it unlocks that capacity or that capability. We will also, I would highlight too, like, the other thing that stresses out our network of assets across Canada and the U.S. is that we have something called storm demand now, which, has always been there, but it's getting bigger. So when you talk about natural disasters and things, this methodology around running mega plants is starting to shift a little bit. You're moving to slightly smaller assets that allow more flexibility within your network.
Diversify your risk. Yeah, not put all your troops on the same boat.
Absolutely. You carry more fixed costs because you have more assets to be responsible for. However, it gives you that flexibility for when markets fluctuate, or if an asset is compromised, or if you have a natural disaster. Flexibility is very hard to manufacture after the fact with a given platform.
Well, the resilience that creates in your whole supply chain and your business model, and also your revenue capability, is huge. And
Absolutely.
Also, when something happens to that plant, that area is also probably impacted, depending on like just the scope and scale of the natural disasters. That you're right. Like, statistically, it's just becoming more frequent.
And we come back. I mean, one thing that's unique about our business today is we're privately owned, and our owners look at it with a 100-year timeline. So from their perspective, when you say they're invested for a long time, they're looking at the next 100 years. They're looking at generational change and demographics, et cetera. Now, it's impossible to forecast that far out, but to the best of our ability, we believe that the West is certainly an area that can support further densification. They're wonderful places to live, work, and play. I live in Edmonton, yourself in Calgary. I can attest to they're both great cities. And I'm not going to get into the war between the two hockey teams.
No, I think when it comes to economic sustainability for our province, we can't be against each other at all. We're not big enough to be against. You know what I mean? We need to unify for sure.
Yeah, and there's a lot more to come to the west on that front. I think BC certainly has more growth opportunities. Saskatchewan, Manitoba as well. So if you're really thinking long term, this is the area you're going to want to be. We've certainly seen that over the past decade, and we're seeing it more so now in Alberta for sure, with the demographics changing and with a lot of in migration.
The forecast that we're starting to hear even about Calgary, like, what are we, 1.6 now, 2.5 in 5 years? Like, there's some hellish numbers that I'm like, oh, that's exciting. But okay, now what's the fallout from all that?
Yeah. And how do we support it? So we need to have assets that are capable of, bringing that on. And again, we talk about that reducing friction, being easiest to do business with the customer. This plant gives us the capability to do that, because in the West, we've had to do some very unique things to try and service our customers, and this will give us the capability and capacity to reduce the amount of unique fixes that we have to do, and will be a lot more consistent and reliable, which is when you work with a manufacturer, and I think about the folks on the ground installing the product, they want the quality to be consistent. Like when they talk quality, that's actually what they're referring to is, hey, when I install your board or when I install your mud or your ceilings, like I know what I'm going to get before I open the package or before I put it on the wall. And I know that it's
back to trust and reliability, because I don't have time for a variable that I wasn't expecting.
Right. Because again, that complicates the process. Then you got to go back.
I'm already a month late because the electricals didn't get put in time or the plumbing got delayed. Like that's just literally how that world works.
Back to our Spider-Man meme.
Yep, 100%. They did it. And like you said, you're kind of at the end of the line, which is always like you're kind of inheriting whatever delays or whatever kind of happen. How competitive is the sector? Like, being that you've been in it for so long, and it sounds like you certainly own a good portion of the market. Is it a couple key players? What's the competitive set look like?
The competitive side of things, it's really an oligopoly across the country in Canada. It's a little bit more fragmented in the United States. So there's,
six. By the sheer size and grandeur of the market.
Exactly. And you've got kind of your four quadrants versus we're really east and west. We're sort of divided just in two distinct market segments. So yeah, there's a few players. There's been consolidation over the past few years, and one of the challenges on that front has been, how do you reinvest in these assets that, it's heavy equipment? How do you make these, how do you build out plants? How do you justify at, the returns that the building sector
it's a capital
has been
intensive play for sure.
100%. And so that's made, the industry consolidate a bit because it's had to. I think that goes
just to stay competitive. Yeah.
Right. And then that goes back to that kind of range bound. If you don't have that, if you don't have growth in terms of actual demand, because we can only build so much.
Yeah. Back to your starts, right?
It's difficult to get that. How do you justify the investment in the business? Now, obviously our perspective on the go forward, I guess I'm referring more to the last kind of decade or the last 2 decades, we've been sort of in that range in Canada. We believe that there is an opportunity for an unlock to, the demographics are in the right place. So Gen Z, the millennials, they're in that age of acquisition space. So that's going to change things. There's the shift from the baby boomers, so money will shift down probably, and so that will open up.
I heard it called the silver tsunami the other day.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid using that because I don't know.
I know, I'll say it because I just had someone say it. It was in the context of the opportunity for business transitions and acquisitions and search funds and a few of the things that are starting to really pop up just because of there's just reality of this whole group of individuals that's shifting to another stage of life, right?
Yeah, and that's, so, you want to be a part of that. And we certainly at CGC believe that's what's going to come in Canada in the next decade, 2 decades. There's going to be the ups and downs, and we're going to roll through things. But ultimately, we think it's up and to the right.
That consolidation you're seeing, is it PE driven, or is it larger players kind of just rolling up and growing through acquiring their competitor in the other sector of the U.S., or someone from the Northwest buys someone in the Southeast?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because I think in the different channel segments, it's happening differently.
Okay.
In the manufacturing space, it's more about, your critical mass, your ability to service large markets, probably more of a geographical play. So you're looking at sort of what I'm referring to even with Wheatland, right? Like, we want to be able to service our customers in every market with more flexibility. You move down the channel to the distributors, they're sort of in that geographical and scale. So again, they've had some consolidation, and there's been more. It's a little bit of both private and public money working on that. A little bit of PE has started to flow that direction. I also think because the trend with PE is, having opcos in your fund is not a horrible idea. I think, again, if you go back 20 years ago, that probably was not something that was attractive to a lot of family offices, et cetera. Like, people just weren't interested in putting their money there, like in opcos. They were looking at other things, or privately held opcos.
You certainly hear a lot more about it now, for sure. It seems to be very viable, looking for that long-term, safe, sustainable rate of return.
Yeah, and it might be too that your rate of return is a little higher, given where interest rates have been. So, that risk tolerance is a little bit higher. Now, I realize we were just coming out of I guess, like, we have been calling it a higher interest rate environment. Now,
that's a very subjective statement. I appreciate you calling that out. Yes, absolutely.
Context is important on that, right? So obviously, like, I wasn't around for 13% or 18% interest rates,
No, but you hear that there's people that have the war wounds from that time, right? I had a mortgage at 18% in the 80s, and I've heard those stories many times.
And as investors too, your mindset is around that, right? So, on the investment side, we've been in this lower interest rate environment, so seeking, higher return, leveraging riskier investments hasn't necessarily made building materials the most exciting place to play, because, again, to your point earlier, the safer assets built with a very long-term outlook, and on that front, like, being somewhat constricted on the demand side, it hasn't made it the most attractive thing. Now, what I will say is, over the COVID period, not that there was really anything good about COVID, but one thing that did change was people started investing more in their homes. The former CEO of Home Depot used to talk about, hey, if people would just spend less on their vacations, and they would stay at home more, they would spend more on their homes. And we saw
COVID
that
definitely changed. I choose to try to find every positive I can out of COVID, knowing it was a terrible, terrible, terrible time.
Yes.
But there was some shifts that I think people reprioritized what was important to them at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely. And so, and maybe they started to realize more of that comfort thing that you were talking about too, because
nesting. I think there's lots of names for it, but
we're still seeing some of that impact today, right? Like, we're still, even today, like, when we talk about housing starts with our customers in the market, we're referring to, here's what's actually started, here's what's been completed, and oh, by the way, there's a significant gap there that's grown, and there's just, the projects aren't getting completed in the same timeline. Now, that's being driven by the complexity of the projects, the size of the projects, and also just the labor capacity and material constraints, et cetera. So there's been this big lag. And so even, traditionally when we would see this normal kind of cycle, that all got broken up through COVID, and that really changed the market for us. Are you seeing that returning to what that was, or is it kind of disrupt? Like, even looking at year over year, anything now is hard because there were so many variables in the last handful of years, right? Tons of noise. It's getting closer to normal seasonality, but we're still not there because we still have this lag impact. Now, it's kind of a backlog. Yeah. If I was, if I had to bet on it, like, I think 2025 will be the year that lag goes back to more of a normal level. Because I think the starts right now with, even yesterday rate announcement with another drop, money's going to be sitting on the sidelines for just a little bit longer because, there's the potential for even another rate decrease. So that will allow, that lag to get completed before the incremental start next year. So 2025 is probably more of a muted year. From an overall, demand perspective. Still will be, well within the range of a healthy, with drywall, we call it like it's somewhere between 2.8 and 3 point something billion feet of drywall installed every year. So that's a real number. That's a real number. Yeah. It sounds a little crazy to say, but no, I appreciate that. Just gives an idea of the scope and scale. It's one of the things we can all relate to, but we don't think about. I would argue for most of us, right? Yeah. I'm surrounded by it as I speak, as I sit here and talk to you. Well, I had a relative who asked me, like, "Oh, do you sell a lot of that?" And I was like, "Well, what room have you walked into that doesn't have drywall?" Yeah. Define a lot. What do you mean by a lot? A lot with a B? Yes, a lot with a B. Does you said the word tariff earlier, which is maybe a scary word right now in Canada. Does any of your product that's getting manufactured here go south of the border? No. Okay. I didn't think so from our prior conversation, but the tariff, that's a big T tariff right now, depending on who you're talking to, right? It's a scary word that's getting bullied around right now. And when you look at your distributed network of assets that you're trying to supply in North American market with, you need to have that as part of your consideration. Outside of, I referred to flexibility, but that flexibility also applies to in the case of tariffs or in the case of, material constraints, et cetera. You want to be as close to the market that you can to supply. I mean, really, we talk about it in two ways when we think about where do we put the next asset. It's, are you close to the customer? Or are you close to the rock source? Because rock is the
I was going to ask
thing.
about that. Like from a inputs or feedstock perspective, that's not an issue. And because obviously the geography and just what the ground we sit on is very different from Eastern Canada to Western Canada. Yeah,
absolutely. So gypsum is a material that you can find in a lot of different areas. So for example, in the Rocky Mountains, there is a little bit of gypsum on the other side of the Rockies, closer like in the BC, Kootenay kind of area. So there is gypsum, close by. The challenge that you run into with gypsum is that there's all different levels of purity. And so when
kind of like silica sand, I'm just thinking of other conversations I've had where quality does matter and the purity does make a big difference on how easy you can get to the end product.
Absolutely. And so that's one of our core competencies as well. I mean, we have a plant in Hagersville, Ontario, which is just outside of Hamilton, and it's actually built on top of our gypsum mine. So the rock comes from directly below and we bring it up, which is very unique in terms of all the assets that we operate. But when you talk about that purity level, the challenge is then you have to look at blending. So you're bringing rock from a bunch of different places across, in some cases, the world. Like in this last stretch, our industry got hooked on something called synthetic gypsum. So about 20 years ago,
I like I like the choice of words you use for that. Feels very deliberate, Sid.
The trend, what happened was full manufacturers they were creating what's called synthetic gypsum in their coal stacks. So they would put these minerals inside the coal stack. What that does is it would collect some of the off-gassing elements that are coming out of the coal energy producing process, and that would actually create 100% pure synthetic gypsum. And they didn't have anything to do with it, so they were just kind of like trying to find different landfills and places to put this stuff. And someone was like, hey, like wallboard, we need gypsum, and we really like purity is important. And so for a while, the coal industry was like, hey, take it. Like, we have nowhere to put this. Like, we just need to get rid of it. So all of a sudden, you saw these gypsum plants popping up around all of these, coal energy producing coal-fired plants. And there's even a plant in the U.S. where the line goes directly from the coal power plant into the gypsum plant, plunks the gypsum down. Then the coal industry was like, hey, hold on a second. These guys are selling this stuff, and it's like gypsum or, heat rock isn't free. And it happens to be in at least 50% of the buildings I walk into. So we should be charging,
That's exactly how that conversation would have unfolded too. Like, wait a second, what the hell's going on here? These guys are getting rich off of our stuff and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
So that business, the price started to escalate after that point. And then what's happened more recently is as we're shifting away or shifting towards, more sustainable energy sources outside of coal.
Yeah, the whole coal industry's changed too. So
right. So now our supply of synthetic gypsum has started to be constricted, and the price has gone up significantly. And the other implication is that a lot of our plants that were built to use the synthetic gypsum from these coal-fired plants, what's happened is that we changed our mills, like our equipment, to actually break down the rock, because the different purity, like when you're producing the cake with 100% pure, you kind of know what you're going to get from a quality perspective, and it was actually a little easier to break down. Well, now we're having to reconsider. We got to shift back to breaking down more natural rock, and in some cases replacing
which just has more variables too, right?
100%, and replacing a bunch of the different downline as well as like frontline equipment. When you're talking about the shift away from synthetic gypsum, it may cost you almost as much as building a brand new plant. So it calls into question, your current asset base. So that's why this conversation is really exciting right now, because there will be a lot of change. The challenge is like, how do we continue to maintain, a very cost-effective solution in that type of environment? And that's something that, again, when you're standing at Home Depot or Home Hardware, or you get a local GSD like a Shoemaker in Calgary, you're probably not thinking about that when you look at the sheet of sheetrock, right? So I think, that's a big challenge for us. Another, we talk about the Wheatland County, Alberta project, $210 million there. The other thing that we're doing is as the industry is having to shift away from synthetic gypsum, we're reopening a quarry in Nova Scotia. So it's called Little Narrows, and we're in the process of, we've just started that project. That's actually where CGC started in Canada. We were actually originally, a quarry for our U.S. Business called United States Gypsum Company, or USG. And so we're reopening that quarry to help support, the deficit that we're anticipating on the synthetic gypsum front. So lots of change in the whiteboard space.
Well, what I'm really hearing you say also is like, this is a long running industry that doesn't maybe change a lot, but I've heard like feels like an inflection point where you guys are really looking at like these change cycles that probably happen not that frequently and a lot more slowly in your industry. There's a bunch of things kind of coming together at the same time is what just listening to, I'm like, oh, this is an interesting inflection time or a cool time to be in the business.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and that's, you refer to that when I, growing up in Alberta, it was kind of my friends were like, well, why did you choose building materials over oil and gas? And,
it's an obvious question. Absolutely. Yeah.
And my perspective was when I was graduating from university, I went into building materials because I thought, well, we're always going to need, spaces to live, work, and play. And the other thing that was happening at the time was a lot of manufacturing was being outsourced or, shipped overseas, and globalization was the theme. And so my thesis was that can't persist forever, and especially when you look at these heavy assets. So at some point that investment is going to come back, and we're just starting to see that now, and it's a really exciting time to be in building materials. So, for anyone out there, any of your listeners who are considering, hey, I'm looking for a change, or I'm looking for something interesting that requires some blue sky thinking and is looking to jump on that wave, certainly there's a lot changing right now, and it's an exciting space to be.
Is it like the sexy spaces get the attraction? Like, are you guys having the same challenge around with labor, or like just new people coming in and finding the sector interesting? Like, again, similar to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I definitely was an outlier when I came out of university, because my friends were like, yeah, good for you, Sid. You go do that. Let's see how that works out for you. And I mean, I've had I love it. It is my life.
I could tell by how deep you are in it. I can tell you live it and breathe it. I mean, no matter what topic I breached, you were like, I have a point of view on that, which I really appreciate that you're living and breathing in it. And how easy it looks to be like those boring quote unquote industries from the outside that we're so dependent on as a society, I think that's why I was excited to have this chat with you. Because I was like, I want to learn more, because I bet there's layers and layers behind this thing that we all kind of take for granted as we look around, right?
Yeah. Well, I think about like, one thing that's interesting, because I would look at the different layers, right? How do we attract people into actually installing the products? It's from my perspective, it's awesome to see all the influencers, highlighting like how much fun it can be, and how, yes, it's a lot of work, but it can be a lot of fun, right? Like, there's a lot of different things. You're solving a different problem every day. So I think that's helping change the perspective on like, do I want to work in construction? I would say the other thing too is the space is becoming more friendly to everyone to be able to work in that space.
Yes, there is some inclusivity that needed to happen that wasn't happening. So you see so much more. My nephew's 21, 22, and she's like, I want to work with my hands. I want to be a craftsman. Like, he takes it to another. He doesn't want to bang nails. He wants to build things. And I see that passion for him, and he will find a way to make that happen, because he just looks at he knows he doesn't want to go and sit in front of a computer or be in an office. But it's this next level of quality and the craftsmanship that he wants to get involved in. Doesn't want to just be what was the stereotype of a construction worker. Not that that's negative, but you know what I mean? I can see he's redefining his version of it, which is funny to watch as an uncle, just watching, casually pushing and guiding wherever it's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just talking about this with my wife the other day. Like, it's little things like, before you think about a construction site, and even, having to use like the porta potty on the construction site was just like oh God, like that's why I don't want to work there. Right. Yeah. But that's slowly starting to change. Hey, every job site, there's still porta potties, but it's starting to shift towards like, now they have nicer porta potties that are, more comfortable. And you talk about inclusivity. That's an important piece, or proper coveralls and equipment, et cetera. So all those things are starting to change, which it needed to happen, and it's now happening at an escalated pace, which I hope brings more people, or I believe will bring more people into the industry. On the corporate side, I mean, I think about it like, how do we attract, the best possible talent, whether if they're considering a future in finance, or if they're considering a future in, tech or something like that. Those are kind of at least from my perspective, when I was graduating, those were areas that people wanted to go.
Yep.
How do we attract, that talent and explain, here's the challenges that we're trying to solve? Like when we talk about
you can have real impact. You can have real impact.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there because we do need some different perspectives to come look at these challenges and opportunities and say, hey, have we ever thought of doing it this way? Or, a similar industry did it like this. Can we do it? And because we get stuck in our ways of this is how we do things, right?
I was just going to say, anytime this is the way we've always done it, there's an opportunity to at least have a conversation. But often you need a fresh perspective. Was it, the mind that got you there isn't necessarily the one that gets you out of it, kind of thing. So how do you bring new people in that'll make you feel uncomfortable deliberately? And for leadership, that's hard, or it's not. You got to lead into being uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it kind of goes back to that whole we follow the building code. And one thing, I didn't really touch on this before, but when you talk about the building code, before it was all prescriptive. So this is how thou shalt build. And today, that's opened up. Now it's you need to hit these performance metrics in order. If you can hit these performance metrics, you can build a house out of toilet paper. We don't care, right? Not entirely.
But even a different mindset in terms of, which I like that. This is not how you should build. This is what we're trying to land on. And if you can get there in whatever creative way you can, but then I really that's a very different set of inputs.
The home has to be healthy, so the occupants have to live in it and be healthy. The home has to, perform sustainably, so these are the metrics that it has to hit, and it has to be safe from these perspectives, from a fire, acoustics, etc. We don't want to impact livelihoods negatively because we gave you a a non-prescriptive path, a performance path to take. So, hey, if our industry is, today the performance path is not how the majority of homes are built. It's starting to shift more in that direction. I would suggest that our mentality in the construction industry is also starting to adopt more of that blue sky thinking. And, I hope that attracts a lot more, unique and interesting folks to come bring their perspectives and help us solve these problems, because it is a noble thing to, we talk about our purpose is to make tomorrow a home for all of us at CGC. And I know that's cliche to throw your value statement out there, but
that's okay, man. It's at the end. If they're still listening, they're bought in at this point. It's all cool, man.
Yeah, if they've listened this long, for sure.
If they're still an hour in, they're liking what you're saying.
But I think the people that, I work with and that work here at CGC, I do think we believe that. And, we do want to be part of that noble solution of improving housing affordability, helping the industry grow and expand. And there's selfish reasons, obviously, for that. We're a profit-driven organization. But there is also this altruistic.
Yeah, but you only get to stay in business if you add value, not if you can go out of business making money.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I had a creative director who always used to say, there's got to be a level of permissibility. No matter what you think or what you say, if your audience, your customers don't permit you to be that thing, good luck staying in business. Yeah. So no, I appreciate your optimism, and I hope you're going to universities and talking, and you got really inspirational at the end, Sid, in terms of I appreciate how passionate you are about it. And it is a make or break in our society. You can't look anywhere and not run into it. How do we do it better? And, these long-standing companies like the one you work with, those are often the ones that have the biggest opportunity, with the wrong attitude are the slowest to change, but with the right attitude can have the biggest impact in the organization. Because we're not throwing out the old way. It's all about improving and making better. And the rhetoric of it has to be this and not that, that's not really how change happens in my experience.
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
It makes good rhetoric. Back to the who's telling the story. Sid, if somebody wants to reach out and have a chat with you about getting into the sector, or just talk and learn a little bit more about what you guys do, are you a LinkedIn guy? What's your preferred form of communication?
You know what? I'm a LinkedIn guy. I'm however you can get a hold of me. You can email me.
I appreciate it. Nice.
Yeah, I will respond to almost anything. Very cool. If you reach out to me on LinkedIn, that's probably the most efficient way, probably the easiest place to find me. Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Sid, that was a great conversation, man. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the work you do. And thanks for coming on the show.
Likewise, Tyler. Thank you for the opportunity. It was great to share a little bit about myself as well as CGC.
It was good. We an hour and 8 minutes, man. It always surprises me. I'm 20 minutes in. I thought we kind of had it all, and the next thing you know, I turn around and it's an hour. But no, the last art of a good old fashioned conversation is my favorite thing to do. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.